The Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau meets Donald Trump today for talks on the future of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA. Now, it won't be the first time they've met. These talks happened earlier this year. Mr. Trump has threatened to rip up the deal because he said it is unfair to the US. And Justin Trudeau both favours free trade and tackling climate change. His country produces around 2 million barrels of oil every day from what are called tar sand or oil sand deposits, and extraction causes significant CO2 emissions. Well, with me is Catherine McKenna, who's the Canadian Minister of Environment and Climate Change, who took part herself in the Paris climate talks and agreement. Will Justin Trudeau be talking about the environment at any point today when he meets Donald Trump?
Well, we have a big agenda with the United States. It's our biggest trading partner and a great friend of ours. In terms of the environment, in the NAFTA negotiations, we're negotiating an environment chapter. So, it may come up. I'm part of the negotiations. But, we've had very frank discussions with the Trump administration about our disappointment when they announced their intention to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. We're certainly going to continue conversations on a whole range of other files. Trade is extraordinarily important to Canada. It's also 9 million jobs in the United States rely on trade in Canada. So, we say in Canada the environment and the economy go together. You can't separate them, and that's what Canadians expect.
Justin Trudeau has said that Canada's efforts to stave off the worst of climate change will not cease, and he is going to show leadership that the world is looking for. Where is the evidence of Canada's leadership on that?
Well, we actually just hosted, we co-hosted with China and the European Union a ministerial meeting on climate action in Montreal. I actually went to Germany earlier this year to meet with my Chinese and EU counterparts, and I said if the US is stepping back, we have to step up.
Canada's still not meeting the targets on climate change that were set by the previous administration.
Well, so maybe it's a lesson to the world. So the previous government in Canada, we've been in government for almost 2 years, I wouldn't say the words climate change. They muzzled our scientists and our emissions grew. We've taken a totally different approach. Not only were we very involved in negotiating the Paris Agreement, but also, we've done things like where there's a price on pollution, on carbon pollution across the country, a phase out of coal. We're moving towards a zero building standard. Zero emission vehicles thing. So we're very committed, but things take time, especially after a government that did literally nothing on climate change.
But you still give something like $3 billion in subsidies to the oil and gas industry. Is that going to stop?
Well, we've committed, as have G7 countries, to phase out of fossil fuel subsidies. That's certainly extremely important, and having the right incentives there. But we're in a transition, and you can't transition overnight. There's some people who would like us to get off oil and gas immediately. That's just not possible. And I say to folks that I'm the Minister of Environment and Climate Change for energy workers as much as I am for environmentalists. But we've been very ambitious. We're moving forward. We've got the right incentives. And we also see the huge economic opportunity when it comes to clean growth. I was with Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England, last night. $30 trillion opportunity. So we're positioning ourselves to have the clean innovation, but it's going to take some time.
Not possible, you said, but is it desirable? Justin Trudeau, only a few months after Paris, stood up in a speech to the oil and gas industry and said no country would find, 173 billion barrels of oil in the ground and just leave them there. Is that the mentality that is still there, that you must extract this, it must still continue down this path?
Well, it's obviously commercial decisions about, by companies about what they're going to do. We have to set the frame. So by putting a price on carbon pollution, by phasing out coal, by making investments in clean technologies, and also by working with provinces. So we're a federation in Canada. You couldn't actually just say, we're going to shut down the oil sands. That would be the wrong thing to do, and it also wouldn't work because
you're
Alberta...
doing far from that. You've just authorised the new pipeline for the tar sands, or the oil sands as you call them. That is going in a completely different direction, isn't that?
Well, not really. So as I said, there's a transition going on, and Alberta. So we have a leftward-leaning government in Alberta that's been doing really incredible things. So they are the first government ever to put a hard cap on emissions from the oil sands. So any oil and gas that comes from the oil sands, it has to fit within that cap. They've put a price on pollution. They're phasing out coal. You can't do these things overnight. People need jobs, and the reality is, if you don't bring people with you, then you're going to lose. And so all the good work we've been doing could be lost to a government that doesn't even believe in climate action. And so we're being extremely ambitious, but it's a transition and you have to do it in an orderly way. And we certainly are looking at all the ways we can accelerate this, but it's not going to happen overnight.
one question while you're here, talking about Bombardier, the company that also supports jobs here in the UK and Canada. Is Justin Trudeau going to make any headway, do you think, on that issue with Donald Trump over those punishing tariffs?
I mean, I think he's been very clear that we don't think that their approach is reasonable, that we actually think that Bombardier is complying with trade rules. And as you point out, the UK has also been very strong and about the jobs that are being impacted in Northern Ireland. And I think he'll continue to make the case. We believe in free trade. We believe that trade is a good thing. That's a good thing in NAFTA, that it's benefited Americans as much as it's benefited Canadians. And so, you know, these are difficult issues, but you know what? You have to have frank conversations with your neighbours.
Catherine McKenna, thank you very much, Canada's Environment Minister.